Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Department of Fish and Wildlife's Climate Change Stakeholder Meeting. My name is Amber Paris. I'm the Department's Climate Change Advisor, and I have also with me Whitney Albright, who is the Department's Climate Associate, and together we make up the small but mighty core team of the Climate Science Program, and we just welcome you and really appreciate the time you took today to join us. I particularly appreciate these yearly stakeholder meetings because it gives me a chance to see some of you in person and also the chance to share the accomplishments and activities of the department over this last year, and in particular the wonderful products and actions of our collaborative working groups. And those are those groups that we form together to take on different tasks and give our partners and stakeholders direct engagement into our climate change activities. So this is always kind of a fun, we get to talk about what we've done and then brainstorm about where we're going to go in the coming year. I also just want to, again, acknowledge and thank all of you for being engaged in this project. We definitely recognize that it takes a lot of time, but I think we are just really proud to have so many people at the table. And over the past year, I've been asked to give quite a few talks about our department's climate science program and how it started, how we got things rolling, and our focus on mainstreaming climate into everything that we do. And some of the groups who have been interested are local governments, also different regional climate collaboratives that are starting around the state, but also other states and at the national level. So I think that this is kind of a model. Other states and groups are looking at how we brought partners together at the table. And that's always the first thing I talk about, is how important these partnerships are and having these folks with you at the very beginning of initiating any kind of work around climate change. And I always say it's really, I attribute the success of the program, the real heart and soul of the program is our partners. So again, I just really acknowledge the time that you've taken to be here with us and appreciate that work as we build this collective vision for responding to climate change together. So this, Whitney and I are going to kind of tag team an overview that focuses on our national and statewide activities, again, those products and accomplishments of our climate stakeholder work group, the progress and success of our climate college, and then where we want to go together in the coming year. So as I mentioned, and a lot of you know because you've been very involved, the last, I would say, year and a half or 2 years, we've really focused on building a climate community within the department and a community that includes our partners. And this whole idea of putting a little bit more of that face-to-face on the different activities that we're doing and building that network internally. And Whitney will talk more about that, about the Climate College, but for me that was also really important when I started thinking about how do I connect with our adaptation practitioners outside of the department, outside of the state. And so there was a small group of us that kind of came together and thought about how can we put together a forum to bring together all these adaptation practitioners with the idea of creating a community and a network as we start to face these impacts, that whether they're local or regional or at the national level, how we do that and how we do that well together. And so I'm really proud of the work that the department has done in allowing me to be a big part of the creation of a National Adaptation Forum, which took place the first week of April, again with that idea of creating a community of practitioners that would help us to accelerate the development of solutions. And when we first started putting this together, this was really one of those things where we wrote down ideas on the back of a napkin at the bar about what we wanted it to look like, and then slowly started to put those ideas together and formed a steering committee. And I remember thinking, God, what if we could just get 100 people there? How amazing would that be to have 100 people there? And the steering committee decided they wanted 300 people there, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, I'm just a little skeptical that we can get 300 people there. Well, as the website got put together and we started putting out this call for proposals, and we waited and waited to see what kind of posters and presentations and symposiums, and nothing was happening, and we extended the deadline, and then literally 2 days before it closed, we were flooded with hundreds and hundreds of proposals, which ended up resulting in 55 symposiums, 12 training events, and 25 working groups over 3 full days. And my concerns about getting 300 people there were all for naught, because we ended up having to close the registration at 500. And there's a breakdown there that kind of gives you an idea that there's an incredible amount of work happening all over the country. And we did also have people from outside the U.S. And I think had we gone and published this more broadly, we would have had even more if we had gone to that international level. But I think it speaks to the amazing amount of work that's happening, and it also speaks to the real need that people who are working on adaptation feel to have a way to network together, to come together, and to figure out how we take on these very large-scale challenges. So again, I really appreciate the department giving me the time to work on this. I think it's been something that's been really valuable to a lot of people. And we here are hosting on our website all the presentations from the event, and there is already in the works plans for a forum again in 2015, and we're working on the location for that. Another important initiative that the department's been part of is the creation of the National Fish, Wildlife, and Plant Climate Adaptation Strategy, and this was released in March of this year. And we have in the back copies of the summary of the adaptation strategy. But what I think is particularly important about this is that this is the first time that a federal, state, and tribal effort at this level. And why I think it's particularly important for California is that the core strategies that are in this document are the same core strategies that we developed as a group in the California Adaptation Strategy in the biodiversity sector. So I think that really speaks a lot to the fact that we were on the right track in 2008 and 2009, and that our approaches as we move forward with adaptation are still very valid. And I think it's kind of a nice pat on the back to all the partners who worked really closely with the department and with state parks to craft those strategies. Another reason I think it's particularly important to California is that it now gives states, our bordering states who might not have an adaptation strategy, another kind of level playing field so that they can look at these strategies, see how they fit into their work, and we have a better chance of doing more of these kind of cross-border projects. And also the more of these kind of documents we have that reiterate these strategies also give us a lot of, in some ways, cover, but also reiterate the approaches that we're taking, because we can point to, California is saying this, at the national level they're saying this, and it just really sort of reiterates the importance and the effort that we're making at that level. Another thing that I know this group has been very much engaged in and is very interested in is the update to the 2009 adaptation strategy. Many of you will remember that I think it was just about a year ago I called you all together to let you know that they were updating that strategy, and you guys all rallied together to work with me to sort of beef up the update and to recraft what we wanted to see in the update. We have 3 iterations that we worked on together. Those are all posted on our website. And then as we got into the summer, the individual who was leading this effort in the resource agency ended up leaving her position, and so everything sort of ground to a halt. And her position was refilled in November with Ann Chan, who is the new Deputy Secretary for Climate and Energy. And Ann has sort of picked up where the different sectors left off and really thought a lot about the intent of the document, the audience for the document, the missing perspectives, and wanted to really create instead of having another 500-page report, something that's a little bit easier to digest for our policymakers and to really make that writing clear and concise and a clear level of intent. So those different chapters are currently being I wouldn't say the content, especially for our biodiversity chapter, has not changed. Many of the key actions and examples of accomplishments that all of you came up with that we worked on together are still there. It's just been framed in a different way, sort of it's a different organizational structure. But we've also added some missing perspectives, particularly a component on the importance of integrating tribal ecological knowledge and working with tribal partners. So I think it's actually really going to strengthen the document. So we are hoping to be able to share the kind of new, shined-up, revised edition of this for you this summer, and then the plan is to release the full document for public review in the fall. But I definitely will keep you guys in the loop on how this evolves and appreciate your continued involvement in this, because for our department in particular, when it comes to biodiversity issues, this is about how we work together to build a collective vision, and the department can't do it alone, and we absolutely recognize that. And so a lot of the examples in the document are not just what the department's accomplished, but what the partners throughout the state have accomplished and what we're accomplishing working together. With that, I am going to switch over, but it doesn't want to move over, to Whitney Albright, who's going to give you an update on the Wildlife Action Plan.
Thank you, Amber. So I wanted to start off with some really brief background information on the plan and on the revision process. But the original Wildlife Action Plan for California was completed in 2005, and we're required to update the plan every 10 years, and so this revision will be completed in 2015. And some of the main priorities for the revision this time around are that we be sure to create a collective vision for conservation in the state with our partners, that we update our species at risk, vulnerable species, and species of greatest conservation need lists, that the conservation actions we identify are consistent with other agencies and that they're complementary to existing efforts, and also that we incorporate climate change impacts and adaptation strategies into the revision. And climate change was included in the 2005 version, but this time we're really working to make sure that we kind of thoroughly integrate it throughout the revision process. So our staff with partners are working through this open standards process for the practice of conservation in order to develop conservation strategies. And so that involves identifying conservation targets, identifying the threats and stressors to these different targets, and then coming up with conservation strategies that then address those threats and stressors. And it also involves building in this component for monitoring and measuring the efficacy of the strategies that you develop, and make sure that we can come back and adapt those strategies as necessary. And so we've also been working with Defenders of Wildlife, and they have developed a way to inject climate change into this process so that the conservation strategies we then develop address the threat of climate change to those different conservation targets. And so in order to address that kind of climate change piece, we needed to get our staff. I should have mentioned, too, that this is being carried out on an eco-regional basis. And so we needed to get these eco-regional teams the climate information that they needed to be able to do that. And so that was one of the reasons that we originally formed the SWAP Climate Work Group. And so more broadly, that work group was intended to provide a mechanism for stakeholder inputs and support to make sure that we're really integrating climate change throughout that process. And so they really got busy and created a lot of products right off the bat. We came up with literature references, climate change literature references for all the different regions, identified partners with climate expertise that our eco-regional teams could call on to help them with this climate piece. And then we also compiled climate projection information on an eco-regional basis of existing literature for those eco-regional teams. So all this information was made available to those teams, and it's also been posted on a SWAP Climate website. The address there is at the bottom of the page. And so since creating these products, the group has been on hold a little bit, but we are looking to reconvene that group for some new projects that we have in mind, and Amber's going to talk about that at the end of the presentation. And if you want more information on the action plan and the revision, we just created a new website. You can get background information on the action plan, learn more about this process that we're working through, the timeline. You can also sign up to receive a newsletter, kind of updates on the progress of the revision, et cetera. And you can also contact Armand Gonzalez. He is the lead for the 2015 revision. So switching gears a little bit, another work group that was formed at the end of our last stakeholder meeting was this climate change menu work group. And this was formed around the idea of creating a climate menu where we talk about how climate change impacts the food on your plate. And the idea was to create this sort of outreach piece where we could talk about climate change in a way that's really accessible and relatable to a lot of different people. And so this work group was small but mighty and came up with this draft climate menu poster. And this is what the draft looks like. So on here we talk about our climate menu, which is a walnut-encrusted trout served over Sacramento-grown rice with a mixed leaf salad and broccoli florets served with a delicious California wine. And so we talk about how climate change might impact those different food items, and then we generally try to convey the message that we are working to safeguard those resources and the food on your plate. And then we give the audience a little bit of an idea of how they can get involved and help us to safeguard these resources. So we're still working a little bit on the messaging of the piece. We want to do a little bit more editing to the poster before we go to printing and distribution. But this is something that we're really excited about, and we're hoping to have wrapped up here in the near future. The last work group that was formed after our last meeting was a climate training work group. And this work group was really designed to help us develop the Climate College and also to create some different resources to support our Climate College participants. So we created what you see on the screen here, which is a training resources website, and it's basically a list of links to existing webinars on climate change and fish, wildlife, and habitat. And so we link to a lot of existing kind of webinar repositories, existing webinar series, or individual webinars that were just out there. And so the intention was that we would put these all in one place. This page lives on our Climate College website so that those participants who wanted to dig a little bit deeper into a certain topic of interest could go here and try to see kind of what else is out there in the way of webinars. I also wanted to mention this climate curriculum webpage. This isn't actually a training work group product, but it's kind of in the same vein of that resources and educational tools. But this is a page that we put together that links to different curriculum resources that had been created around climate change and biodiversity for K through 12. So again, just trying to kind of get all this information together in one place. All right, so I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking about the Climate College. And again, the training work group helped us to really get this off the ground. We brought that group together and said, talked about what do we want this to look like, what topics do we want to cover, what level do we want to keep this college at. And so some of our main goals with the Climate College were to build a community at Fish and Wildlife that included our partners around climate change, to create kind of a venue for people to come together and think about this issue. We wanted to provide a really basic foundation of climate change knowledge for all of our staff. So we wanted this to be really a Climate 101. Anyone could join, learn about climate change and how it relates to what we do at the department. We also wanted to promote networking across our branches and regions and with our partners, and we wanted to make sure that the Climate College was an approach to training that we could evolve over time with future iterations of the course. And this is what we ended up with. These are the major course components. The Climate College is a 10-month lecture series where we have one lecture each month for an hour, and we did that because we wanted to make this as easy to commit to as possible. So we just have 1 hour a month. You can come in. The lectures are available in person or via WebEx. We record all the lectures. If you miss one, it's easy to catch up. So this was kind of our schedule. We brought in guest speakers, mostly from outside the department, to come talk about each topic. All of our guest speakers provided some recommended readings for our participants so that if they wanted to delve deeper into the topic, they could look at those. We also created an internal online discussion forum for our staff to go to talk about the lecture, the reading materials, just post questions, things that they're thinking about related to climate change. We asked that the participants who went through the course and wanted to receive a certification that they complete a final project. And we really provided hardly any guidelines for this. We just said, we want you to think about what climate change means to what you're doing and what you're doing at work. And so, this might mean writing a paper on a topic that's of interest to you, giving a brown bag presentation in your office on climate change, integrating climate change into something that you're working on, and giving us those examples. So a lot of different directions to go there. We wanted people to get really kind of creative with it. And then I mentioned certification. We did offer for everyone who took the course, they can get a certificate of completion from the department. We also, for our staff, they're able to get training hours through our Office of Training and Development. And then everyone who completes the course is also eligible to receive credits from the Wildlife Society as well. And finally, we wanted to include an award ceremony at the end of the lecture series, and that was just to acknowledge all the people that made it all the way through the course and highlight the work that they've done. So once we came up with this kind of this structure, and we had decided on all of our topics, we lined up all of our guest speakers, and we were ready to launch the college in September. This was September of 2012. And our first lecture was basically just an introduction to the course, a welcome. We had our director, Chuck Bonham, come and speak. We had 2 representatives from the governor's office come and talk about the governor's climate initiatives. And so at this point, we were just thinking, please let there be 5 people in the room so it's not just us sitting around and looking at one another. And we were overwhelmed with the response we got. We had, for our first course, 176 people register. 111 of those were Fish and Wildlife staff, and 65 were partners. About 75% of those who registered for the full 10-month course, so for all the lectures. And within Fish and Wildlife, we had representation from all of our regions, all of our different branches and programs, and all of our different divisions. We also had really diverse partner participation as well. We had a lot of representatives from NGOs and land trusts, state agencies, federal agencies, consultants, the general public, and this miscellaneous category includes representatives from the academic community, tribal representation, local government, et cetera. And so we were so excited to see this response, and it really demonstrated to us that there really was a need and a desire for this sort of information. So we are currently on Lecture 9 of 9. This lecture is taking place this afternoon at 1:30 here in the auditorium, and it will feature 4 different Fish and Wildlife staff talking about how they think about climate change and what it means to their work at the department. And so our guest speakers are our Chief Deputy Director, Kevin Hunting, our Chief of the Law Enforcement Division, Mike Carrion, Gordon Lethig, who's an environmental scientist from our northern region, and Debbie Azeltine-Nielsen, who is a senior marine biologist in our marine region. So they're going to come, and we'll have really short presentations from each one of them, and we'll do kind of a Q&A at the end and try to end the course on a really inspirational note and close it out with a bang. So I encourage you to attend. All are welcome. Even if you've never attended a lecture, it should be a really good one. And then finally, we are planning for the award ceremony next month. It will be here in the auditorium June 25th from 1 to 3. And everyone who has completed the course, that's watched 7 of 9 lectures and submitted a project, will receive their award from the director. And we are really also hoping to highlight the projects that we've received. And those projects are due at the end of the month, but we've already been hearing from our staff about what they're working on. And they're really innovative. They've been getting really creative with some of their ideas. So we hope to highlight their projects at the ceremony as well. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Amber, and she will talk about where we go from here.
Thank you, Whitney. We have had, as you can tell, a very busy and productive year, thanks to our partners for being involved. I especially love to hear the success of the working groups, because as you can see, you guys are all a core reason of the success of our larger scale initiatives in the department. So I love those working groups. One of the things I had wanted to share with you is, this continued focus on mainstreaming, and someone was asking me, well, Amber, how do you know that this program is successful? How do you measure whether you've been successful? And I think that's something we've really sort of been grappling with, because, it's easy to count the amount of times you have maybe climate change in a document or the amount of people who are in the climate college, but does that really speak to whether our efforts to mainstream climate change into everything that we do are actually being successful? And so one of the things that I keep thinking about is that we are seeing success every day. And for the people who have been involved in this working group since 2008, you remember how hard it was to get people engaged and for them to figure out, what does climate change mean? I'm too busy with everything else. I don't have time for this. But more and more over time, I see these success stories constantly, and I think one of that, that focus on building a community of climate practitioners is happening here in the department, largely because of the Climate College, but there are more and more people who are coming together, talking about it in different groups around the state in different regions, and then again, this kind of effort that we've been part of to build a community at this larger national scale. So again, Whitney talked about the number of people who are involved in the Climate College, but also we've been really excited and astounded by the number of projects. We have more than 30 people who are doing projects, and these aren't, we made it pretty easy for you to do a project, really something we wanted to make sure people could be successful in doing something even with the busy schedule, but the amazing projects that are coming through are really blowing our mind. We have a really amazing poster that's already been put together about the impacts of climate change on tiger salamander. We have a group of people who are working together with the university to create a climate level course and bring students out in the field to do sampling around water. We have another person who is working in their community in Upland on a water-wise garden, and he's bringing his community, the people in his neighborhood, together to talk about the impacts of climate change in water. So it's really kind of kicked off this major this opportunity for people to do something they're really passionate about. We are seeing more and more documents and plans that include climate change, and I like to tell the story that just a couple years ago I used to keep this folder on my desktop that was called Climate Change in Docs. And I would, every time somebody would say, Amber, I've got climate change in my document, I would stick it in there and say, look, we've got another one. Well, now there's so many that I can't keep up, and people don't even send them to me anymore. So again, this is part of this whole idea of mainstreaming, is that you don't always see it. it's not something that's really easy for me to always know who's doing what where, but it's coming. We have all these emerging climate leaders in our program, people who are working with partners to really get their arms around climate change, what it means, and really integrate it into their work. We have more and more staff who are now being given time devoted to work specifically on climate change. So they are negotiating with their supervisors a percentage of their time to work on climate change, and some of that time is to coordinate with us, but they're really doing things within their own region and within their programs to promote climate adaptation and sustainability. We also have regional working groups that are popping up. The newest one is in our marine region, and we have this growing number of people who get on the phone once a month together to talk about climate impacts in the marine region, the different documents, the reviews they're doing, the projects, and how they're tag teaming to get climate into other parts of the work of the region. So these kind of regional staff groups are on the rise. And then we have more of these examples of how we're actually getting adaptation on the ground. So climate change projections and impacts are being put into plans, and then we're actually seeing them translated into work on the ground. And one of the newest ones I just learned about was work we have out in Elkhorn Slough, and this is a really unique and wonderful partnership that the Elkhorn Slough is a national estuarine research reserve, and it's a partnership between the department, NOAA, and the Elkhorn Slough Foundation, and they are doing some really interesting cutting-edge research and monitoring around climate change, and they have long-term baseline data that they are really thinking about how they use that historical data to answer questions about climate impacts and tracking, and they're also changing some of the questions they're asking in their data collection. And then they actually have adaptation projects where they have put in, and planned for things like sea level rise and are actually taking actions to respond to that. And in particular, there's some interesting work they're doing around tracking the changes of the plant community in this wetland-upland ecotone as sea level rises and seeing how that plant community is moving and changing. And they have a tidal restoration project out there, and I have that picture of the sea otters out there because this is a unique situation where these otters are actually just using the slough, not the open ocean area, and they are hauling out on the pickleweed in the tidal marsh, and they're recognizing that these areas are subsiding, and so they have restoration projects adjacent to it, and they're actually thinking about how they create habitat for those sea otters to be able to move and use new areas in the restored areas that they're working. So again, it's this whole idea of intentionality, that they are not only putting in the projections and planning for X number of inches of sea level rise or whatever their climate models are telling them, but they're intentionally turning their actions for restoration into something that responds to what their projected changes they expect. So we're really excited about this. There's a lot of examples of this. Again, I don't always hear about these examples because people are taking the ball and running with it. So I think we're really excited when we hear about these things, and again, it just really speaks to this kind of emerging leaders within the department who are really pushing to get climate change into everything that they do. So in looking forward for this coming year, we had a couple ideas. This working group structure seems to be working really well. It gives all of you a chance to have direct engagement with the department and to work directly with us on these important initiatives, and it also really helps us in building that rapport with you, but also in really being successful in the products and accomplishments. So the three working groups we wanted to propose to this group were focused on the update of the California Adaptation Strategy, which is, I should note, is being kind of talked about as possibly a readiness strategy. Also to continue the work of the SWAP Climate Work Group, but with some new focus, and then again to continue with the Climate College. So with the readiness strategy, and I talked a little bit about that, but the two areas that we're particularly looking for all of you to be engaged is for review and input on that biodiversity chapter. Again, you guys have put a significant amount of work in crafting the update last year. Not too much of that has changed, but it is kind of a different lens that we're looking through that. So to have you guys to be a part of that and have the opportunity to have input on that, and then to keep you in the loop when the strategy in its entirety is released in the fall. So again, you have an opportunity to review and provide input. And we'd also like to ask your help in reaching out and inviting more tribal participants, the tribal nations, to join us and have an opportunity to work on this as well and be a part of that. So we have already some contacts, but that's one of the areas we'd like to focus as well. The other working group, I just came up with this name and I kind of like it, the Climate Smart Swap. So that's just my thing. I'll see if it sticks. But this work group, as Whitney mentioned, has been really important to our staff as we begin the revision process, because the stakeholders that have been on this working group have provided an incredible amount of really important information for our staff to be able to figure out what the expected climate impacts are to the ecoregions that they're working, and then to take that next step into integrating that into the open standards process, and then as we move forward with adaptation strategies. So we would like that group, and we invite more people to join it, and hope that the people who have been a part of this will continue to be a part of it. But we want that continued participation and input for the ecoregions, that you have the opportunity to work directly with the ecoregions on the climate aspects and development of the strategies for adaptation that will be in the SWAP. But also we are looking to do a statewide vulnerability assessment as well as a marine vulnerability assessment. And so we have put together internally a small think tank of people who are thinking about what that approach would look like, what the different caveats are, who needs to be involved, what kind of data, starting to work through those. So we are really looking to all of you who might want to join us in that discussion and be part of that think tank. Both the statewide approach is more of a terrestrial habitat-based approach, and then the marine component, we really would like to have more people who have the marine expertise to join in that conversation as well. So that's kind of what the big focal area we'll have in the climate program and supporting the SWAP will be around these vulnerability assessments. And then the third group is to continue with the Climate College. And as Whitney mentioned, when we designed that first kind of Climate 101, we never intended to repeat that course again. That was a one-shot deal, our chance to sort of get everyone on the same page and to give everybody the chance to have the same basic foundation of knowledge, with the idea that future iterations of the Climate College would be more topically focused. And so one area that we felt we didn't have enough information on in the 101 was more of a strong focus on marine and coastal ecosystems. And so this next iteration of the Climate College will focus on marine systems, but we've also been working with several partners, 2 different tribal nations, to look at how we can bring in a tribal component. So the idea is that we'll probably have a shorter course, maybe a 6-month course, and that each topic would have 2 speakers. So say if the topic was ocean acidification, you'd have a speaker talking about ocean acidification from a state or federal agency or an NGO partnership with the academic community, and then we would also have a tribal perspective. So the idea is to build this partnership and to really have a strong focus in this future Climate College on marine and coastal issues. So we're looking again for a group of folks who want to join us to really kind of hash out what that course will look like, what the topics will focus on, and the speakers, and how we best sort of fulfill the needs of both our fish and wildlife family, but also the partners who are engaged in this important process. So we have those three working groups, and we have some sign-up sheets, and then we also have an email on there if you're interested in any of the 3, and we'll sort of begin convening those groups over the summer. And then again, I would just encourage you to join our very last lecture of the Climate College today. For those of you on the WebEx, if you don't already have the WebEx information, we can make that available. Just shoot us a quick email and we'll send it over lunch, but most people should already have that. So we're excited for this last lecture and to celebrate the Climate College in June, and hope you can join us for the last. And thank you. So again, we really appreciate Whitney and I particularly really, because we are such a small program, we really appreciate the work of our partners in joining us and helping us to be successful, and also to tackle these larger issues around climate change. So thank you for being a part of the meeting. Thank you for being on the WebEx, and we'll be able to stay around and talk a little bit after. For those of you on the WebEx, if you have any questions you want to type into the box on your computer, we'll be happy to answer them. Otherwise, we hope to see you all at 1:30.